10:05, call the meeting to order. Joel.
Well, we have a draft ordinance close to being ready to circulate. So Jesse, yesterday at the board, you said, we were considering outdoor in ag land, and the board revolted against that pretty strongly.
Correct.
What I had in the draft was not even that. It was in a greenhouse, in a structure, but technically called outdoor because of the light usage. So I think Heidi's seen it, can attest. It's really confusing because you can only do outdoor in ag land indoors, right?
Right.
And explaining that to people is going to be real fun.
Because nobody's taken the time to understand what they're talking about.
Nobody is going to take the time, though.
You have to understand what the definition of outdoor and indoor is when someone that's like Jesse or myself or anybody else tells somebody outdoor.
I think if you are actually trying to get a permit, you're going to understand.
Sure.
Because you're doing the same thing at the state level. So I think that distinction makes sense for the people using the law. I'm worried about it for the people who are going to be discussing and pondering the law and voting on the law.
Sure.
But definitely, I think outdoor, outside of a structure is a no-go, right? You agree with that
I think so,
vibe from the board?
Yeah. I was kind of leaning that direction from the beginning anyhow. And I think we had time to talk about, what the parameters of what it would look like if it was a thing. And so I think that was worthwhile, but I think we can isolate that as its own topic and not, have it be an optional inclusion in the future or whatever, but at least we can keep a hold of what we accomplished in that conversation.
The other thing is we have kind of some zoning and consistency issues with PO. We've got roads issues. I don't think we're that close on cultivation in timberland areas. And so I think the group kind of should decide whether you want to wait and do one cultivation ordinance for everything, and it's probably still a few months away, or if you want to send a indoor manufacturing and agricultural zone cultivation ordinance forward, kind of the way we've discussed with the 500 and 5,000 and 2,500 square foot limits. And Blake, you might need to be filled in, and I'll let Jesse do that, on where we are. We've been discussing up to 5,000 feet of indoor cultivation in ag zones, zone parcels 20 acres or larger. Your voice for the ag community has been, what we've all kind of been waiting to hear if you're on board with. So I don't know if Jesse, you want to
Sure.
give more detail on what we've been talking about.
Yeah, so just to back up a little, I'm for the latter suggestion of moving ahead with a small scale indoor ordinance in manufacturing and or agricultural in the interest of getting a more complete supply chain done, and then work on outdoor or timberland in the future. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, and then, so we've been a ship adrift with no captain for a while, and as a result of that, we have big outdoor grows in ag land, and we got big indoor grows all over the place, and so we need you to rope us back to sensibility. The board is projected sort of a dissatisfaction with the idea of any kind of visible cannabis in ag lands, which is understandable. I think this group kind of predicted that a little bit. So I was thinking to suggest we just back away from that entirely and revisit it later, the idea of kind of outdoor type cultivation in ag land, or even within structures that, you know, don't fully mitigate the nuisances the way an indoor structure would. So maybe that's a detail we get back to later, and then maybe just focus on where we were with indoor. The manufacturing lands seem pretty straightforward, less issues. So I think you were here for a meeting when we started talking about indoor, small indoor on ag lands. And we started with the 500. And then the next tier is 5,000, which personally I'm not for, although there's a case to be made that it's a good job creator and could be set up to be relatively, you know, unobtrusive. But just I don't like the idea of indoor production generally. I think it's appropriate on a small scale, but I don't like generally the idea of you know, large indoor production. But that's just my opinion on that. We talked about stacking of small licenses, stacking of the 500 square foot indoor license in order to achieve something in the middle. We kind of talked about maybe using that as a way to get up to 2,500 square feet, sort of as a middle ground. What else? We had a 200-foot setback from property lines, I believe, or from, let's see, my notes are incomplete on that. We didn't have a great setback for indoor adjacent to other ag lands, but I think adjacent to a residential land, we had an increased setback, even for the indoor, 200 feet, I believe.
Yeah, I think for indoor, fully enclosed indoor, it was 200 feet. And like a greenhouse, it's not fully enclosed with 1,000 feet from a residential zone. Sure.
I was thinking we might just drop that topic though.
We're talking about starting and just kind of, well, you've made the suggestion too, that kind of how we started in the beginning and then we kind of morphed into trying to roll some type of outdoor into this cultivation initial ordinance, but we're kind of now speaking about rolling back and just focusing on just trying to make an indoor ordinance and let that go through and then work separately, independently on an outdoor ordinance. And I think where the 1,000 feet rolls in is an outdoor ordinance.
Yeah.
And so we probably it's just in the semblance of trying to come to a conclusion on an indoor cultivation ordinance, should maybe drop talking about all that stuff for a moment and just focus on coming to a finalized point on the indoor.
So if I remember correctly, the indoor was a 200-foot setback from residential and a 50-foot setback from all property lines.
Right, which was the same as like a livestock an existing setback for livestock buildings, which was the idea, was to potentially be able to utilize existing buildings.
And this would be fully enclosed, no light escaping, total odor mitigation. And then those setbacks wouldn't apply on manufacturing zones.
Right.
Just do whatever the normal building setback is probably, I don't know.
And just to point out, I think that this could work, correct me if I'm wrong, if a person was going to apply for an outdoor mixed light license from the state and their structure met the standards defined by the county for indoor and size and everything.
Yeah, I don't
work. If you weren't right, the county doesn't care if you're burning a light or not.
Right.
Okay.
The county doesn't need to care what your state permit is for, as long as it allows you to do what you tell us you want to do.
Right. So it allows for the outdoor category, but without the outdoor effects.
Right.
So to speak. And that might take some time to explain, but I can make my best effort to explain it to the board.
The same as...
That would be really difficult to achieve with your smell mitigation that's required, right, on the county's side of the permit?
No, I mean, if you were going to set up a 500 square foot indoor facility and you had it set up exactly the same, but you were letting the sun come in instead, I mean, It'd be a fancy setup, but
Yeah,
it could,
it would be.
for just a 500 square foot, but you could do it. And that's maybe where if we're going to talk about stacking small licenses together, then it could be a thing.
Yeah. That becomes a harder scenario to control heat in your facility when you're letting the sun in.
Oh yeah, you'd have all kinds
With the
of,
same smell mitigation process.
yeah, you'd have lots of HVAC kilowatts
Yeah.
for sure burning, but you know, it's a high value crop, so people are burning a lot of power. That's my gripe with indoor. It's hugely electrically intensive.
Yeah.
It's enormous. The carbon footprint of an indoor grow is enormous. So that's not.
Okay, is there anything else anyone wants to add? Maybe my benefit before we get my opinion here.
So I think we had covered this when you were here, but the 500 square foot was on 5 acres or larger,
Yeah,
and the 5,000 square foot was 20 acres or larger.
right.
Right.
And this is ag zones
That was for indoor?
only.
Yeah.
That was for indoor?
Pure indoor.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so, and that's on an ag parcel,
Yeah.
not a manufacturing parcel.
Right. I think manufacturing, I don't think the lot size really matters.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
And those are the only two
if the building
areas.
fits.
And so then the other, yeah, those are only 2 areas. And then the other real thing to maybe talk about was the sizing of it, you know, like the stacking up to a certain size. You know, we were thinking, is 2,500 a good maximum, or is it up to 5,000 and you let them stack a certain amount of license, and then after that they have to purchase a 5,000 square foot license or something like that?
And would that only be on the 20-acre parcels, or?
Yeah, it had to do with the size of the parcel.
Yeah, because the 500 is the smallest permit anyway, so.
So you couldn't stack on a 5-acre parcel?
Right.
No. it was
Right.
enough over.
Right, I'd agree with
And
that.
I think the ordinance is actually, the one I drafted, totally silent on stacking, right? You can do up to 5,000 square feet on 20 acres or more. You have your plan that says how many feet you want to do. If it's 3,000 feet, however you get that approved by the state, do it. If it's a bunch of 500 square footers, or if it's a 5,000 square foot license and you're just kind of, you have excess capacity that you can't use, you know, it doesn't matter to us.
Okay,
I guess it would be just a question of the fee process involved, like if one way or the other was more beneficial for the county if they had, you know, certain fees attached with certain licenses possibly.
I think our fee would just be for your use permit. You know, the issue with the cost effectiveness of a bunch of 500s or a 5,000 is kind of between you and the state.
right.
The board did express concern that our use permits are too cheap.
They'll fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, so we'll have to fee study that and do some estimates and figure out what on earth an appropriate fee would be, but we can deal with that later.
But having multiple licenses, then you wouldn't need multiple use permits?
No.
No? Okay.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, that would be a fee thing for the county.
Because it's not going to cost us any more to look at, to verify that you've got, you know, 3,000 aggregate feet or one 5,000 foot permit. It doesn't matter to us. You're looking at a use permit. You have an operation plan that you've submitted. You have a diagram that shows the 3,000 square feet you want and proof that the state's going to let you do it. It doesn't make any difference to us whether you've applied for.
If they were in different locations, different operations, then you'd have different use permits, one for each one. But if you're just getting multiple licenses from the state in order to have the size you want of one garden at one location, then you get one use permit from the county.
Yeah, because we're not going to issue 2 use permits for one piece of property anyway,
Right.
right? We're not stacking use permits, just stacking state licenses.
Right. So I guess the question maybe I'd like for Blake to weigh in on, I guess, is just the idea of going that big, going like, to me, 5,000 square foot indoor operation, that's pretty big business. That's not a 5,000 square foot building, remind you. That's like a 10,000 square foot building or a 20,000 square foot building if you were gonna conduct all of
Is it more realistically 3 or 4 buildings?
that, yeah, that too. I mean, if I was doing it, I would want everything within one building, so I'm not moving plants and product outside between buildings. to satisfy your security protocol requirements and everything, it'd be much more effective to do it within one building. Although one large building, that's a big deal, So that's why I'm saying it's a huge operation. You're not going to buy a 5,000 square foot permit and then do it in a 5,000 foot building. It wouldn't work. It's a really big operation with lots of employees. And then to Supervisor Berkowitz's point that he keeps reminding us, it's a lot of cash. To meet payroll for an operation like that is a lot of cash every week, So it's like, it's getting a little bit into the social discussion of how big of a business do we want to invite to the county, with the notion of where are we starting at. That's a big place to start at. People, the big operators would laugh at what I'm saying, about 5,000 square feet being big, but that's a 200 light operation or more. 200, 1,000.
So how many employees are you thinking that would take, Jesse?
Well, if you were...
I have in my mind 5 to 8. That's what I think, 5 to 8. It's not that many.
Well, if you were severely underutilizing it, I would say, but you're not going to maximize the output of that.
I would think that, one thing we got to consider is, if we had a McDonald's worker, I think they would be shocked that we would be talking about limiting their opportunities to do a little better in our community here. They're not going to show up. They've never shown up. They're not showing up. But in the time, over the period of the summer, and I've said it a few times, Greenfield's largest employer now is Loud Pack, and we carry Loud Pack products at Delmar Patients Together. And that's Greenfield, California's largest employer now. And I haven't investigated how big Greenfield was to begin with or what that really entails. I know they hired another 170 in July. But, and we're not going to get that kind of, employee, that kind of job creation with these, small footprints. And what Greenfield did do is they put a $15 per foot fee per square foot, but they limited the fees. Right. So that a larger operation actually was incentivized.
Right. Only the large operations can operate at $15.
But ethically, what we should be doing for our community is incentivizing both. Incentivizing a small scale and incentivizing a job creator.
Sure. It's just the weirdness of the industry. Makes it a little weird, but I'm all for it. I'm just pointing out the caution points, and the things that have come up in other communities, things people complain about, the scale of it. So that's all. And that 5 to 8 people could run the production floor of a 5,000 square foot operation. So if that business model was purchasing all of your plant stock, say, from another business, and then you were sending all the product off for processing to another business, then maybe you could run it with 5 to 8 people who were really professional. But if you were producing your own stock on site and processing on site, you're talking 20 people, 30 people to run the entire operation at maximum efficiency. And with the cost of the permits and everything, you can't run it halfway. You really got to maximize it with the margins the way they are. So I don't know. I've never run a 200 lighter, so I'm not sure. But.
Yeah, I would disagree with that statement pretty much entirely. I mean, I can run a 20-acre outdoor facility with 20 people. I'm not talking about cannabis. I'm just talking about floricultural in general. And so, a 5,000 square foot indoor operation taking that many people to run is I mean, that's just a little bit far-fetched, really, from my perspective of seeing what it takes to fill, millions of square feet.
Yeah, it's a totally different product. I mean, it depends on what you're producing.
I get a totally different product, and I have experience doing that too, and seeing that done. But
if you're producing, let's say you're producing a product for extract, that's quite a bit different than producing like a hand-trimmed dried flower. That's a different project altogether. So. I don't know. It's hard to compare. There's really very little comparison of agricultural production to cannabis. Saffron, maybe.
Is cannabis for extraction going to be a viable indoor crop with the expense and the taxes of indoor?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
But are we saying that indoor really is indoor? We're really saying indoor is a sophisticated greenhouse, right?
Pretty much.
Well, I think what Joel's question was if you're burning lights as your primary light source.
If you're burning lights, no, but if you're talking about a greenhouse.
But even a high-tech greenhouse that requires lots of BTUs to cool and to whatever, and there's more labor involved in that, it's not going to compete with, inland fields of cannabis, like the regions where you can produce it cheaply, in large scale and mass outdoors without infrastructure and minimal labor, where you could run 20 acres with 20 people and you harvest the stuff with a tractor,
Yeah, I mean, I know somebody in Washington that, I know Washington's a different beast, but there is, there's a company that I know that operates about 120,000 square feet, all greenhouse, and they have about 15 employees. And they do everything. They nursery their own genetic breeding stock. They have sophisticated light depth greenhouses, all retrofitted out, and basically every single employee is cross-trained in every single thing. And that's how they've got their efficiencies down to where they can do, 5,000 pounds a year of flower for market. Then they can also trim up. They do pre-rolls. They're just getting involved into doing manufacturing on site because they got their land use certificate from their county in Washington. So it is possible to get large scale if you have really well-trained employees, a really good operational handbook in place, and you cross-train them. Because you basically, when things are harvested, they go to the curing room, you go through the processes, and every employee is a part of that step all the way down.
Sure.
So there is possibilities to do large scale with fewer employees than,
It's just the structure in California is so punitive by scale. The cost per foot is so much.
Washington and California are very similar in fee structures. How they, the difference with California is that there's more layers of bureaucracy because of the local jurisdictional controls. Washington didn't place local jurisdictional controls. They basically have the LBC that kind of handles everything.
Right. So I think they did it in a way that was more suitable to traditional bigger ag operations where you just go bigger on your land.
Well, and they separated it from vertical integration. In Washington, there's no vertical integrated companies are not allowed. So you can't hold a cultivation license or any equity stake in a cultivation license and at the same time hold any equity stake in any other license category. So that's kind of, made it a little bit more, you focused on what you did and you allowed other players to open up the other sectors. And then you just commingled together. But it's possible to run a large-scale, farm with a small employee set that, as long as they're well-trained, that's, I think, going to be the biggest determining factor for most people operating these businesses is making sure their employees work hard.
In all regards, this is really a labor-intensive thing. And, speaking from the agriculture industry, labor-intensive job, that labor is the biggest cost period in California right now for this type of thing. And so that's where you're going to find in the cannabis industry is going to be looking for ways to reduce labor. And so you're not going to get people just flooding their facility with employees to make it that much efficient because you're losing it on the outgo on the employment, on the payment.
And like any other agricultural, business, there's going to be seasonal work, so during harvest time when you've got a lot of open air grows that are basically
it doesn't apply to indoor though. And so indoor is just so much more.
I think Eric wasn't here when we narrowed the scope of the thing down to pure indoor.
Pure indoor.
Okay, yeah, we dropped the outdoor and the ag.
Even with the indoor, you could still get efficiencies. I mean, efficiencies are really where you're cross-training your employees. As a business owner, you're going to want to make sure that your one employee doesn't just sit in one room and do one thing, because it's not efficient for that employee to just sit. So you're gonna make sure as a business owner that you're gonna, even as an indoor grower specifically because of efficiency needs, you're gonna cross-train everybody.
It's just so, it is very different. The indoor permitting costs and everything, it costs a lot to operate it, so you really have to maximize your square footage.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I don't know where the metric, where the point of diminishing returns comes in on that, where you pump more labor into it and then you don't meet your output curve, you know.
To be determined.
Sure, but there's a lot of people who run that scale of operation already, but not under the parameters of all the regulation that's required. Like, you'd have one full-time person just entering data into the track and trace system. Like, every time you drop a leaf on the ground, you got to enter that into the track and trace system as waste, you know, stuff like that. So it gets difficult to, you know, it's set up to be labor intensive, you know, right now because of all the regulation. Anyway, getting a little off track of where I was going with that.
Well, thanks for the update, everyone. You know, I have missed a couple of meetings here in a row, and just in general, it sounds like, you know, the decision from my point of view would be fairly simple. You know, I've kind of always been an advocate for smaller and start slower. And so from an agriculture point of view, you know, we're talking about 6 to 8 employees, these concepts. You know, that's, I don't know, 200,000, 250,000 a year in payroll at minimum. If it's cash, it's cash. If it's legal and you've got workers' comp and all the SDI and disability requirements, then, you know, at our rate, on our ag workers, it's about 42% on top of that. So throw another 150,000 on top of that number. So now we're talking 400,000 plus on that payroll. And so it seems, I think I'm hearing what's being said. You know, in the United States, we function on capitalism, and price equals cost in that system eventually. All right, that's what's happening to this industry that we're here talking about, and it's a tough pill to swallow sometimes. So the luxury of you know, just jumping in and doing it and saying, oh, there's lots of money in it, you know, those days are passing us as we talk, and so. You know, I don't think we can sit here and regulate the future. You know, well, obviously we can try, but what I'm telling you is this is somewhat out of our hands, and I guess I would like to kind of stick with the smaller scale at this point. That would be my recommendation as an ag guy who's kind of been out there doing things and seeing things. You know, that would just be my preference at this point. Let's not fight it. We don't have to push this into our county. It will come, and we can, you know, get our arms around it at the appropriate time for the appropriate reasons. I think right now there's you know, more emotion involved and speculation than total reality. So I guess I would certainly advocate for the 5,000 or the 5-acre smaller, you know, size. Let's get all the details on that wrapped up. Let's maybe then talk about stacking those on larger parcels. I think that makes sense. That will force some efficiency into the system at some point. That's some way, and then, you know, of course we have to be careful with the setbacks and you know, not sticking that in a situation where it's really offensive to the neighbors. So in a nutshell, that's where I would be coming from.
So just for a little clarification for myself, because I was a little late, we've narrowed the scope to just indoor cultivation is what we're kind of discussing currently, or?
Yeah, so I have like kind of a draft ordinance where, as we were discussing before, there's the pure indoor, and then there's outdoor that is really also indoor in a greenhouse, right? That's pretty confusing. And we were in front of the board yesterday, and the board voiced very clear opposition to outdoor.
To the agricultural lands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's all we were talking about. And I think it was my feeling, and I think Jesse agrees, that we should take something simpler and move it forward and not wait, and not figure out TPZ yet. You know, just take something forward, because I think we're kind of far away on timberland right now. And I think this concept of the outdoor that's really indoor is maybe something we can fine tune and work on in time too, because that one's kind of abstract. So that's kind of the conversation has been now. Pure, indoor, enclosed, no light escaping.
On ag land.
on ag land and manufacturing. Yeah.
I just would maybe touch on that, and that concept is just, it's a bit of a oxymoron to say that we're going to do, allow this in ag zones and then require that it's indoor and then require that it, no light escapes and the air coming out is filtered. We're shoving all these parameters into a system that is ultimately inefficiency, and I really don't know what the outcome of that is ultimately, except I believe it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel the same way a little bit, but I mean, I think we've ceded the indoor necessity just out of the sake of what we've heard from the Board of Supervisors and from, people like yourself, Blake, about the not wanting to see it in the ag land. I mean, I think it would be easier as a group and individuals to just say we could do open air growing in ag land, small scale, but because of the pushback we've heard, and that's kind of why we're splitting hairs through here. I mean, it does, and I agree completely with you. It does seem like we're, it's an oxymoronish path we're kind of taking here, because, but we're just kind of going with the flow. I don't know exactly what to say about that.
Yeah, shows that we're all trying. Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I feel that all of our conversation has come back to going around to what the Board of Supervisors will approve.
Yeah.
I know that we are just a group to recommend to them, but I think we're also a group for the community to recommend things they don't know about. That's why I was kind of saying we needed to do an outdoor of some sort at the same time. But they're bucking the system, but I don't think they have the knowledge to know the system. Well, they have knowledge to know the system of their sorts, but they don't want to look out into the real world, what's going to happen. And I feel like Blake, I think it could explode, but I think this whole market's going to explode. Canada comes into recreation in the 17th or so of October, supposedly, and it's a $5 billion industry to go recreational in Canada. And I think Del Norte could get some money from that. I mean, if we have things in place and we can do things, it's going to ship as specialty markets out of Canada like lily bulbs are to around the world. It's going to be Del Norte's brand, and Humboldt will have its brand, and California itself will have its brand. And I don't think we can be afraid of it, and that's one thing I also think supervisors are. They're afraid of it. And I also don't want it to be like Humboldt, where you go down and you see just massive grows right off the highway, or like going to Grants Pass, you see fences everywhere. I don't want it to see that either. But, Gitlin had a big comment that he wanted to get rid of us as a group because nobody else has a group that they go to in any of the counties and get, information from. I see that Humboldt's starting a group. I saw on the news last night they want to start a group. And it was of the same sort of people, agricultural people, growers, that kind of stuff, to give them some more knowledge of what the market is like. 500 square feet on, a 5-acre parcel, I think is a great start. I think it's, it's a minimum start. 5,000 square feet's a little bigger, but I think that this area, if we gave enough areas in the county that it could grow, could use them and could have the businesses and the money, and both the county could get the money and, the people, like Robert has said quite often, that, it would give a fair market salary to some people. So I think that although we're here for the Board of Supervisors, we have to look a little bit bigger outside of the box for the people and for the production that this county could be capable of. And just kind of look both ways. I mean, don't always scour down because the supervisors say no. I mean, I think that they're going to find out that there's people out there that are going to tell them, not just us, that say, you guys lost it. You're not thinking about what's out there to gain. And, I'm a big agricultural person in this county too, and I'm not going to go out and plant 1,000 acres of this stuff or anything. But, agriculture has its spot in Del Norte County, and not everybody that owns ag wants this or will have it no matter what. So don't be afraid that we're going to be overdoing it. I think that it'll take care of itself.
Well, I mean, as I've said, I have a draft ordinance that incorporates this kind of greenhouse, quasi-indoor-outdoor thing. You know, we can take that forward. You know, if that's really what makes more sense, and it kind of sounds like it to me, it makes more sense on ag land. It's going to require fewer resources like electricity. It's probably more environmentally friendly. It's probably going to be more palatable to the Coastal Commission. It's just going to take some explaining, I think. It sounds real silly when you say that you can do outdoor, but it has to be in a structure, an enclosable structure.
I think you might get a lot further in your discussion if you first educate people on what the definition that state uses of what outdoor and indoor is. It's purely a light-driven thing.
Sure.
You know, and so once you premise that information to someone, then what they're talking about sometimes changes, right? Like, oh, okay, outdoor isn't just outside with nothing around it.
Yeah, but that's a level of nuance. It's tough.
I don't know.
mean,
I
it's just
think
tough.
they understood. I mean, like when we were at the board yesterday giving the report, the couple of them asked that question. I think Chris specifically, he made it clear. He was, you know, asking, "Are you meaning just out in the open in ag land?" And I said specifically, yes, out in the open. I wasn't talking about a structure that can mitigate at all. And it was, I don't know, I suppose a way of feeling out the board for that, you know, because I think we had a consensus here that there is a way on a small enough scale to have it just out in the open and really not bother anybody. But that's fine, the board's not ready for that, you know. So I didn't then say, well, there's a medium ground where you can have, you know, a very well-built structure that doesn't release odor and doesn't allow you to see the plants, but doesn't utilize very much electricity. And, you know, whatever the state calls that, we don't care, but it works for the county. You know, I think they're capable of understanding that. You know, I didn't go there specifically with it, but I don't think we should sell them that short.
I think you're right. I think the board will get that.
Okay.
I think, you know, they're going to get a lot of calls and letters from constituents that don't. And that's fine. Like, it'll be a process probably. It's just, you know, kind of keep in mind that's one of those challenges to deal with. It's not,
Joel, I know you need to leave in a few minutes. I have, I guess, a comment then a question. You know, the comment is just to remind everybody the obvious, right? We are a committee that has been asked to do the details. I think we're doing that, and we're generally doing it correctly and right, and we're trying to consider all things, and then we're trying to hand things to the Board of Supervisors, who are the elected officials. Ultimately, this is all their responsibility. They can, you know, take our suggestions or reject them and manipulate them and do whatever they want, right? So we need to try to, you know, give them something that's a little more neatly packaged if we can. You know, that's how I look at this. And, you know, there is no right or wrong once we hand it off to them. That's up to them. They're the ones that have to get reelected or deal with the, you know, the outcome of their decisions. So with that, Joel, I know you mentioned you needed to leave early. With what you've heard here today and that ordinance, the draft that you have written up, do you think that's ready to circulate with us? What would the process be moving forward?
So what I need to do before I circulate to you is circulate it to staff.
Okay.
And so Heidi's seen it. I have red line comments from her I haven't read yet. I haven't heard from Taylor yet. I haven't heard from my boss yet. So hopefully maybe by the end of this week,
Okay.
I can send you the draft. And actually what I have so far is the non-coastal side. I'll have to make some adjustments for the coastal part. And it excludes all timberland so far. It's just manufacturing ag. But it's not, I don't feel like, it's not that far away.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to leave.
And it includes the 500 and the 5,000?
It does, with the different setbacks, you know, within a structure, but it uses the definitions from state law and indoor and outdoor. All the things we kind of been talking about are in there.
And I think, like Kurt said, that a lot of it is educational. You know, if We need to bring in a slide to show them what an outdoor grow is, which is a greenhouse basically with removable sides and roofs or whatever you gotta do. We have to do that because I do not think that the guys on the Board of Supervisors go out and get the knowledge.
I actually think it's consistent with our 6 plants ordinance that defined a greenhouse as outdoor, right? Does that sound familiar? Yeah. So yeah, we can.
Okay. If I'm growing on ag land, I'm putting it in a greenhouse. That close to the coast, I don't care. It's going in a greenhouse.
Because of the dampness and the
Yeah,
weather.
the dampness and the contamination.
In the end, I mean, we can all probably sit here and say, what are the most appropriate uses in the certain areas? You know, the coastal, you know, lowlands here, we're talking about in some type of structure.
Yeah.
You know, up in timberland, it's more so where you're going to see the pure outdoor growing, you know.
Absolutely.
Indoor is going to be somewhere on the grid. You know, these are appropriate ways of doing it in the certain locations. Doesn't mean that someone's maybe going to tweak and try to change stuff as you make these ordinances, try to contain what's more appropriate.
Yeah.
So I have a question for the group here. So Joel's going to hopefully circulate that draft ordinance. We will see it here towards the end of the week and hopefully be discussing it next time. Have we made some decisions today or here over the last handful of meetings that says that we are only going to look at the 5-acre concept right now, or we really, he just mentioned that both were in there, or are we still absolutely open to the larger scale?
Yeah, I'd like to ask that question too. I don't feel like we have solid consensus on going larger. And I just, you know, on what we're talking about, indoor or outdoor, indoor.
We'll just say in a structure.
For the indoor ordinance.
Structure growing.
Structure.
As pertains to the indoor
As
ordinance.
pertains to.
Yeah.
He's trying to say both, I think.
No, I'm saying just structured cultivation, you know, inside a structure.
Inside.
And I guess what I'm saying is I would have two different opinions, whether it be for an outdoor ordinance or an indoor ordinance.
And his outdoor ordinance is within a greenhouse.
Right, we'll call it the indoor ordinance.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean you're
Well, the
using
reason
that.
I'm saying that is because you're talking about a 500 square foot permit that you would stack to achieve to a certain size versus a 2,500 square foot
Sure.
permit
Right.
that you would stack to achieve to different size. So that's why I'm saying like, okay, well,
Right, exactly.
the sizing of the square footage makes a
Right.
difference depending on what ordinance we're talking about.
So I'm talking about stopping at 500 square feet, just being the most conservative municipality
No stacking.
in the entire state.
Yeah.
Nobody's done this yet, and I
And
think that's,
Jesse, that's, to be clear, that's without stacking, and
Without
stacking.
stacking.
Stacking for, as I'm understanding it, is consolidating, say, 2 or 3 or 5 permits on one property. Say it's a 100-acre property, and you could put, you know, 5
sure.
of those clustered together, right?
Well, yeah,
So part of the reason why we talk about that, Blake, and just so we're all on the same page, because we talked about that before, was that really from the state, and I don't have all the specific numbers in front of me, I've just got kind of the generalizations of the costs involved. The way the state does these licenses, they're designed to be stacked because the cost of multiple 500 square foot licenses eventually achieves to very closely what just purchasing the one 5,000 square foot. So financially, if you wanted to grow 4,000 square foot, you would possibly,
Yeah.
well, I'm getting handed some numbers, but
So-
but you would accumulate a multiple 500s to get to the size you wanted.
So the logical incentive isn't there, is what you're saying, financially?
The financial basis of the law is that you would stack multiple small licenses, just you would achieve your closest accumulation to what your square footage you were looking to grow would be. And so really what we're talking about is just, really should be just, what is the maximum square footage
Yep.
Right.
we want to do?
Right.
So let me say that a different way, and then I think it becomes more clear to me anyhow that would be a bad idea at this point. And so, as Kurt's talking there, the concept of stacking smaller ones, you know, in a group really means that you're clustering, and you're going to have a larger grow with 4 or 5 names on it, as opposed to one name.
No, it'd be one name.
It could be one name.
It could be one name with 5 permits,
Well, it's not even 5, it's like,
or 5.
it's not even separation. I mean, you can just have one
Okay.
garden, you know, of whatever size, and then whatever the permit's called from the state, I think, is less.
I see.
Is less important, but
Okay.
I don't know. We got some new information over there I'm curious about, though, schooling us.
It's his math homework.
Yeah, that's good.
The app fees. These are just the app fees, though. These aren't the license fees.
Yeah, so what that's showing you that, yeah, that's kind of application, those are basically the same thing I'm saying, like the
Application fees are like
application
10
fees
times, or the
just increase
license fees are
exponentially.
like 10 times as much.
They equate out the same.
They equate it to
Yeah.
the same totals, it's a method to
Right.
pay appropriately for the amount of square foot that you're growing.
So all you have to have is a garden bed or a string or something separating the spaces, and then you can conglomerate them together. So it doesn't functionally make any difference when you're cultivating. If you have 10 500-foot licenses or one 5,000-foot license, your garden can be set up basically the same.
And we had come to that based off of the fact if we wanted to give an entry-level opportunity, for somebody to say, I'm going to incrementally over the next, if my first year of 2 500-square-foot licenses go well, my business outline, and I'm profitable enough to reinvest for the second year, maybe I'll get 2 more, and I'll be 2,000 square foot the second year. It was an opportunity to incrementally give smaller scales the capability of growing.
Sure.
So ultimately, the state licensing isn't designed necessarily to be a limiting factor, it's basically a payment structure system.
Right.
So it's up to us, the municipality, really to determine what is the sizing that is appropriate. And that's where, I sit here and say 500 square foot is pretty ridiculous to have any kind of commercial viability to that at all. I mean,
Sure.
None.
So that's where we're kind of, okay, so do you let it up to the 5,000 square foot mark? Because that's a one license from the state, if you went all the way to 5,000, or you could go anywhere below it by stacking multiple 500s together.
I think we can just incrementally do this. If let's say we started with a 500-foot license allowance, we don't have to wait a whole year. If in 3 months it was obvious that people wanted to know more than that, then the board can revisit that. They don't have to wait a whole year.
I think
So
that
I
you're
think
totally wrong.
Yeah, totally.
Because once you get this 500 in, the Board of Supervisors are going to think they did their job. And wipe their hands clean, they're going to wait at least a whole nother year before they come up with any other decision of stacking or going to a 5,000. And some way in my own mind, think they're not even going to come back and see it. So for us to do something right for the community, I think we have to do 500 with a maximum of maybe 2,500, like we had talked at one time. You can stack up to 5. And that would give the early, smaller growers that chance for their second year maybe to get some extra growth into their business. But yet, it will also show the supervisors that there is growth in this business in this county, and maybe we do need to go to that 5,000 in 2 years or whatever. I don't think they're going to do anything next year after they do this first ordinance.
Could be right.
I mean, how much
I like to think
opposition
that they're a
have you
little
had
bit
doing-
more, well, I don't know. I mean, when you actually, get honest and you get, like, I don't want to say one-on-one, but when you get realistic with them, they understand, and you kind of take the politics out of it and you just talk realistically. They seem to understand things. They seem to be more receptive than I think the community gives them credit for, honestly. But I don't know.
I would
It's hard to say.
be on the frame of mind that we should be discussing something in the thousands of square footage as the initial line, because ultimately what we're here to do is we're here to recommend what we think is appropriate, and somebody else can, the board of supervisors, they can do whatever they want with that recommendation.
Well, we can put a timeline in.
Make it bigger, they can make it smaller.
We could put a timeline in our recommendation, like if we say it was, 500 square feet, and then in 3 months, this needs to be revisited to 25. I mean, we don't have to say that, we could project a timeline for expansion that is more advanced than we think that the board may be willing to do. But it is important, I think, to just establish that this is really not about business establishment. The scale that we're talking about is not for quick business establishment. This is for an experiment to teach the community and to teach the board what this means, so that they're not scared. Because we've seen that, they're scared of it. This whole panel, thinks it's okay to have cannabis outside in certain places, but the board is scared of that. And so I think it's it's reasonable to use an ultra-small, totally non-viable business model as an experiment.
I kind of disagree with that in some semblance. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think to set businesses up for potential failure is not what we're here for. That's not at all what I came
not what
here
I'm
for.
saying at all.
My intention was never to build an ordinance that I thought was just a test pilot. It was to try, I mean, obviously, everything we're doing is a test pilot situation. But to say that, you know, our intentions or what we're here for was to just give them the smallest scale and see if it worked or if it failed, I mean, we're setting ourselves up, we're setting anyone up who's going to get a license here in a 500 square foot maxed out. I mean, if we're talking about you only get one 500 square foot grow license for the first round, everyone will fail. I mean, there's just, you will not make money. The economics prove that out. And, you know, we can sit here and battle that all day long, but if we got the real people up here who are actually currently operating these businesses, they'll tell us the same thing. 500 square foot, one license, you will not make it. Well, and it's not fair.
That's not fair to say to everybody, you know. I mean,
it may be a fairly broad statement, but it's a fairly majority statement. It's a fair reality of the business practices of cannabis.
I don't think so. I know a lot of people who would love to employ themselves.
But see, I think we're getting conflicted in what we say. One moment we say one thing, and then the next moment we conflict and contradict that statement. So we need to stick to what our intentions were. Just like Kurt said, we were here to give recommendations as to what we believe would be appropriate sizing. Personally, from a personal opinion, I don't believe that starting at 500 square foot and capping it for one license per entity I don't agree with that. I think we should be up in the 2,500 square foot. If we're trying to find a medium where the Board of Supervisors is okay with allowing this to be a test, then our test has to be a little broader. It can't be just 500 square foot, from my opinion, in an indoor, because it's not going to be profitable for anybody.
Well, that's why I think we just need to come up with I mean, I come at the angle from, I'm
stack 5 licenses to 2,500 square foot.
I'm thinking about the structures that we could be using in this county, and that there's the structure that it's going to be in is way more than 500 foot. Yeah. So why are we telling the people that use that structure, you can only use the corner of it? You know, if it's going to be in that structure, they're thousands of feet, some of these structures.
Well, a well-run 500 footer takes thousands of foot building, at least. You have to have a solid 2,500 square foot building to max out a 500 square foot grow. Your 500 feet is your production area.
No, you don't need 2,500 square foot for a 500 square foot grow. Inside of your building.
In order to get 2 to 3 pounds per 1,000 watt light, I do.
HVAC and that's what you got to do goes outside of the building.
If you're not getting 2 to 3 pounds per 1,000 watt light, you probably are, like Eric said, you're probably going to fail. But if you know what you're doing and you can get those kind of yields and you need the space to be able to do that efficiently, I could make a great living doing that. I wouldn't fail. I'd be in business and I'd be supporting my family.
The only other thing I would mention with that is the realities of distribution and market space and shelf space. If you're only producing 500 square foot 4 times a year, you're going to have a very hard time finding a distributor to distribute your product to the shelves because you don't supply them with enough to make it worth their time. And that's the structure of how cannabis is distributed to all the dispensaries. You're a self-distributor, good luck knocking on doors by yourself in a 500 square foot grow, trying to get 50 pounds sent to a dispensary.
I disagree with that completely. It's such a new business. I know distributors now who will take 5 units. It's such a new business. There's so few distributors, licensed distributors right now. It's not developed yet. So I don't think there's any way to predict that. That could be true in the future. But I don't think that that's where we are with this project right now. But
we're really manipulating this, too small. The state sees this as a small scale, being 5,000 square feet. So let's start small and let's make it. Let's incentivize 500 square feet because that's a small local person who needs some help. Let's look at that as a small business, as we're helping our small business entrepreneurs. And and then let's have the 5,000 square feet stackable on 20-acre properties to see if we get a job and create. And we're already we already have obstacles with this. We have the coastal zone. We're not going to be able to build any buildings on these properties. We have so many obstacles. 500 square feet it is too small because it's just one person coming in hoping to make a little living, and it's not providing anything to our community. As a wage earner, and 5,000 square feet is small. By the state definition, it is small, you know? And, you know, if we're just doing 500 square feet, is my opinion, I don't see anybody trying to, you know, unless you just luckily happen to be living on the property and notice, well, I'm 5-acre ag, I've got the building right here. You're not going to make any investment to actually see this test happen. So we'll have a big test, you know, that never gets filled up with its samples, you know, so we never collect any data from it, you know. So, you know, we're really arbitrarily trying to make it small too, I believe. I haven't noticed the board, you know, pickling our scales. We've talked about up to, I think, 10 or 20,000 square feet. And the board's never picked on us about our scales. They picked on us about visibility. And so we're solving that with greenhouses, you know, and eventually we'll have to solve this with trying to figure out, well, how does more property outside the coastal zone become ag? Because we want some jobs out of this, you know.
Good debate. Yeah, so I'm thoroughly confused now.
What we get for starting at ag.
Yeah, exactly.
I just hate indoor. That's
yeah.
the honest truth.
Yeah,
I'm going to pick on it till the end of time.
We don't have to like it.
I think that, you know, there's a lot of good points here, and some do contradict the others, and so at some point we have to step up and make some decisions. Maybe that's not today, but maybe it is. You know, I'm going back to Bobby's point here in regards to, you know, his opinion of how the board would handle this, and I guess I would say I'm somewhat in agreement with that. I think that it's silly of us to think that, you know, we can do something today and in 3 months start to change it, because from an outsider's point of view that's unfamiliar with this whole look and process and, you know, touch and feel and smell of the whole thing, you know, nobody's going to change their opinion in less than one season. and one season isn't necessarily a great sample. And so I think the reality is that folks that are against whatever today are going to be against it for a couple of years, generally, right? Unless we persuade them of something different. So to me, that's how the outsiders are going to look at this. And then in regards to, you know, what we're putting forth, I guess obviously we're going to be reading something from Joel that includes both, and then, you know, we need to seriously consider that, understand it, and then look back at it. In regards to the concepts, so I've got two experts here saying two different things in regards to whether this is profitable or not. And let me just go back to what I know about capitalism. Nobody's got that answer right now. We don't know if it's profitable or not. That's, you know, American ingenuity. We keep getting faster and better and cheaper with everything we do. And so we don't know the efficiencies of a 500-foot grow. You know, the potentials for that. We really don't. And, you know, that will evolve over time. And so I just want to get that on the table, because I truly believe that with all my heart and soul. You know, we only know what we know today, and that's not everything. So I'm not weighing in yes or no with that. I'm just trying to point out some basic economic realities.
Well, that's so evident in the different farmers. I mean, when you go around, you dairy different than I dairy, you know. Hopefully we both make money sometime. Once in a while. It's not this year, but sometime, you know. And and it's the same as lilies. I mean, there's 10 lily growers or 5 lily growers out in Smith River 4 now. Yeah. And so they all, I mean, they're all growing a lily, and they're all doing it their own efficiency way. And one uses 20 employees and one uses 10. You know, some are going to use half the extra area you're going to use, but you're going to do it your efficiency way. It's going to come out, and it's going to, you know, people are going to do it different ways. Ma and Pa's are going to have their kids go off to school, and they're going to go in the back room and do their 500 square foot grow. You know, so you're going to have different things. I just think that we're here to recommend to the board, and I think 500 square feet is just the smallest, and there should be some tier ways to grow a little bit bigger. And if we don't want to be humble, then let's stop it at 5,000 square foot or something like that as a recommendation. And so that's just my feelings.
You know, how about we think about it like this? I mean, if we are saying 5,000 square foot maximum, I mean, we could incentivize 500 square foot up to 2,500 square foot. Say a 500 square foot cottage license could stack 5 licenses, max. If you wanted to go to 5,000 square foot, you would just have to pull a 5,000 square foot permit. You know, so that we're not allowing a stacking of 10 licenses. We're allowing a stacking of 5. If you decide that, you know, 2,500 square foot just, you know, doesn't fit your model, you can go up to 5,000 square foot. Or maybe we just cap it at 2,500 square foot. But I do believe, like Robert and like Kurt and like Robert here, 500 is too small. We do need to allow for, I believe, just for the overall success rate improvement. So we can get to 80% success rate for businesses versus 40%.
Right. To what Robert was saying, it is true that we haven't really gotten any pushback on scale when we're talking about indoor. The first time we did broach the subject, we did talk about 500 and 5,000 and nobody batted an eye, but it's the impact like you're talking about. So that's good to note. And then as far as licensing, it probably doesn't matter. I mean, if we're going to go to 5,000, it probably shouldn't matter how you're structuring the licensing, you know, because let's say your facility was ideal for 3,500 square feet. It may be a little cheaper to get 3,500 square feet worth of permits from the state than it is to get 5 and then not use 15 of it, you know.
And then you could use the other 1,500 of a 5,000 square foot building for your curing and your processing space.
Sure.
I mean, that works.
So, yeah, I mean, that'd be kind of more for Joel to weigh in on, maybe how appropriate it is to stack a bunch. But, yeah, I'm as much as I dislike indoor, I'm not going to block consensus on going to 5,000. Yeah, if that's something that the board can pass, if it's viable, you know, that's also part of my caution. I'm pro-cannabis. I don't want to see limitations, you know, so my caution also comes from what I believe is viable with the board. But if the group feels that this could be viable with the board, and they'll tell us if it isn't, and we can change, I suppose. It's quicker for us to change than it is for the board or the ordinances to change.
Yeah, I mean, Chris did mention at the meeting yesterday too that he had visited the large-scale grow on tribal land, and I mean they're about 20,000 square foot of greenhouse.
8 people employed.
So they're eight full-time employees. Now, obviously, 20,000 square foot of grow space is larger than we are in.
And that's different than indoor. I would say that 5,000 square foot of indoor is equivalent in production to about 20,000 square foot of.
But unfortunately, because of our tax, the way our taxes have been broken up, we will have people who pull an indoor license just to grow it in a greenhouse.
Certainly.
So, I mean, you know, they may not be using lights, but they may just pull an indoor license in ag land so that they can actually grow on their ag land.
It's important to note, though, that like when you're talking about a 5,000 square foot indoor versus a 5,000 square foot traditional greenhouse type outdoor, they're totally different production. I mean, you're going to get 3 to 5 times, well, depending on how you're doing your outdoor, but a single season outdoor compared to a really intensely run indoor, you're talking 3 to 5 times as much production.
Well, you can get two cultivated harvests with 6 watts a square foot.
Sure. No, I know.
You can get a harvest from February to the end of May, and then you can get one from the beginning of June to the end of August.
Right, but that's why the indoor license
and that's just pulling a straight outdoor license using the minimum amount of wattage per square foot that the state defines as being outdoor.
Sure, and that's why the license types are, an indoor license type is 5 times as much per foot as an outdoor license type, and it's like 2.5 times as much as a mixed light license type.
But you can still get 2 harvests with an outdoor license in a greenhouse by using the minimum lighting.
It'd be a mixed light license type, because if you pull a tarp, it's a mixed light. So.
But we're not issuing mixed light.
Well,
you're not pulling a tarp though. That's the thing. Because if you time it right, if you start your veg flowering, if you flower your veg in February, you don't have to pull a tarp because your light cycle's already at that spot. And if you harvest by the beginning of May, which you should be able to if you start flipping in February, you harvest in May, and then you harvest in July again. So, you know, the
Yeah,
end of
but
July.
ultimately here, when we're talking about an an indoor license and an indoor license through the county and an indoor ordinance, it will be virtually impossible for a facility like that to qualify for the indoor license from the county because they will have almost no way to mitigate the smell that is going to be required in the, in our license, in our use
You
permit
just keep-
from
you
the
keep
county.
You keep the greenhouse enclosed and you ventilate it just like you would an indoor light, but
I'm
it's just
just-
allowing the sunlight to come through.
I'm just pointing out that indoor is typically more productive per foot, that's all.
Yeah.
That's-
No, I know, and I was just pointing out the fact that because of our tax structure, we will be looking at somebody on ag land pulling an indoor permit just so that they could put it in a greenhouse with the minimal amount of lights.
Sure.
You'll see that.
Oh, yeah.
Just because of our structure. It's the way that, it was a mistake we made in the learning curve about how we didn't include a mixed light tax bracket. If we had done that, then somebody would just pull a mixed light permit. But because we don't have that as a qualifying permit for us because of our tax structure, somebody will pull an outdoor or an indoor permit on ag land, but only use 6 watts a square foot.
Sure. And
And they'll harvest 2 times a year.
Well, they'll pull an outdoor permit.
I think Joel still has to weigh in
it's
on
not
whether
necessarily
or
an
not,
indoor.
on how the county
Indoor
is
will be
going to
3
tax
times the
it.
price.
But we may
or
not
whatever.
allow outdoor in ag.
Well, that's
I don't see that happening.
Let's
I
get
mean,
into this one, Joel.
They may not allow outdoor in TPZ zones.
That's true,
right?
too.
So, I mean, again, this comes back to the education of what outdoor is and isn't, and people understanding that, you know.
Okay, so for the board report that's coming up in the next board report.
2 weeks?
Yeah, we'll probably, are we going to try to meet again next week? What's your schedule, Blake?
I'm available next week.
Does everyone want to meet next week? So we'll meet one more time before the next board report.
Okay.
So I won't worry too much about putting that together, but I would like to have some consensus, at least by the next meeting, for, if we can just, if we're, right now, we're comfortable with going up to 5,000 square feet, I can just put that down if we all
Yeah.
want to nod to that.
I think we are, right?
Okay.
No, we know we are here, right?
So that's on the manufacturing and ag.
Yeah.
Up to 5,000.
And again, let's still kind of keep the option to read through what Joel's written up and, you know, really finalize that decision next week.
Yeah, good idea, definitely.
I did not. Board availability.
Okay.
And then we talked about 20 acres for 5,000. Is there some break? Are we going to talk about, so a 5 acre, are we going to stop at 500? Or are we going to go to 1,000 on a 5 acre?
I'd like to
or-
hear from Blake on how he feels, because I think a lot of that discussion had happened in the
Yeah,
couple meetings that Blake wasn't here.
What about
And-
10 acre parcels? Can you do
No.
2,000 square feet on 10 acres? You know, are we going to tier this up a little bit in a ramp? Or how do we want to structure this?
My gut on that, the answer to that would be no, that,
No what?
no, you can't, just because it's 10 acres, double up.
Okay.
Right.
So it would be,
but-
until 20, you can't go over 500.
But I'm not sure, you know, if,
We can get another meeting to kick it around.
yeah, if we say 500 on 5 acres, and then you can stack them and tier them, then obviously, you know, every 5 acres, you would logically think that you could stack one more.
Yeah.
You know, and so maybe that it should be that simple, but you know, my first response was, when I think of small parcels and I see a 5 acre one and a 10 acre small parcel,
About the
sometimes
same.
there's not a big difference.
Right, now I hear what you're saying.
So think about this when you're contemplating that.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're talking specifically to ag zonings because we've got 2 zonings we're working with, and we're comfortable with the max of whatever we're discussing happening on manufacturing zones. But if you don't allow it to be incrementally larger, let's say from between 5 and 20, what you're going to do is you're going to drive all of it to the 20 acre parcels.
Right.
Because someone who wants to produce isn't even going to start on a 5 acre parcel.
Yeah, and let me just weigh in on that, being a Humboldt County guy. You know, what really has bothered me as an ag guy, and what I've seen is if we require something like that, then you've got this, say, a 20 or a 40 acre parcel that's, you know, someone's using the corner of, or a piece in the front, and you've got all this dead, wasted green, you know, green grass that turns brown and never gets utilized, and, you know, it looks like a, you know, a state-managed, anything. And it drives me nuts. And it's wasted resources, and it's, carbon non-sequestering, and it's just backwards. And so I'm really against that. I don't like the inefficiency that comes with that kind of rules and regulations. And so, we've seen a lot of properties, and I'm just going to say Ferndale, for instance. It doesn't matter what your property is. If it's 5 acres or 60 acres, it's worth a minimum of $1 million to anybody, because they'll come up and put their house on it. And, they just have a bigger backyard that they're going to neglect. And they're not going to rent it necessarily out for, to the cattle guy or any grower of any other ag crop. And so it doesn't get utilized, and that's a terrible event, I think, for any community, period. So that would be, how I would weigh in on that. And I'm curious to see what Joel's written up, and then I know I will have maybe a more firm opinion next week.
I know personally, I'm more geared towards the setbacks than the sizing of the property. You know what I mean? Like, visually, to somebody, just anybody walking down the street, there can very easily be no visual difference between a 5-acre ag parcel and a 20-acre ag parcel, because maybe they're all next to each other and there's just a whole bunch of open area, right? And so I'm more concerned about making the setbacks proper.
I agree with that.
And so, like, even on a 5-acre parcel, I'm okay with it being thousands of square feet in there if appropriate setbacks are made from, the sensitive areas that we're talking about. And that's just my opinion on all of that, because there's not a lot of real difference between the two parcels, other than the 20-acre parcels, you get more of them adhering to the setbacks that we would be talking about. But I think we definitely should be focusing on what the setback and the sensitive area zones are, more than just saying, let the size of the parcel dictate that.
Part of the reasoning with the large parcel size was to have a mechanism for limiting the number without having to throw down a hard cap. That was one reasoning behind that. If we're going to just end up with a hard cap number anyway, then we don't need to utilize that as a tool to limit it. But that was one of the reasons behind that. And then I've always said that it really doesn't matter what the size of the parcel is, because the shape of the parcel could have it such that the area you're using is no more than a couple of acres effectively. And then you've got a weird shaped lot. You've got 20 acres way over there that isn't anywhere near your neighbors or where you're operating. So you may as well only have 5 acres, yet you're allowed to have a bigger operation. And so it really doesn't matter. So it all comes down to the setbacks from your actual operation to your neighbors.
I got notes here, and I don't know if Blake was here. Obviously he wasn't when we were talking about setbacks from these 5-acre lots adjoining residential and adjoining ag lands.
Yeah, we went over that when you weren't here a little bit, but
show us. So you've already
just
gone over
briefly,
Yeah,
so do it again.
From my notes, we were at a 5-acre ag property from any property line. We were 200 feet.
Okay, I thought we just went over that, and it was 200 feet from residential property lines,
residentially zoned property.
50 feet from a neighboring ag property.
Because we were using the stocking building setbacks.
So, yeah, and that's 200 feet from a property line, regardless of whether they have a structure in that area or not.
It's a residential
zone.
So we use the church tree as an example. The church tree, basically, they're adjoined by residential lands, even though they're an ag property, they're an ag 5. They would have to be 200 feet from that residential setback.
It doesn't matter if it's a residence or not.
Yeah, it's just the residential
property line.
If it's zoned
So if
that
it's the
way.
backyard of those people with Church Tree, their house is on Church Tree, in the backyard, it's got to be 200 feet from that.
Got it.
So perhaps if we want to talk about larger operations, maybe we talk about a larger setback, but then we were like, well, why? Because it's in a building that mitigates everything anyway. And so part of the discussion was the reasoning for limiting the scale is also just general commercial activity, the coming and going of whatever that happens when the larger your operation, the more traffic you generate.
Well, and it also had to do with your nose. You could smell it.
Well, no, we're talking, not filtered though. This is going to be filtered and mitigated, so it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be smelling it regardless of the size. But it was like, how close is it appropriate to have a large commercial operation with a lot going on? And then there was some comments to like, well, it's agricultural zoning. I mean, it's already principally permitted for some pretty heavy commercial traffic all the time. It doesn't, you know, it's like you could set up an operation that requires tons of truck traffic and lots of employees, and it's, you don't even have to get a use permit for that, you know, so why are we picking cannabis to death on traffic, you know? And so I remember that being a component of the discussion when we were talking about it. And so I think that was kind of where we just came to, well, let's just have 20-acre parcels, because that'll just kind of limit the number, and you'll probably have less chance of bothering your neighbors, but no guarantee. So yeah, I think that was sort of the development of that. I don't know if we gotten into the right place with it, but I think that's how that came about. But that is important to figure out if we're going to go between 500 and 5,000, what are the parameters for that expansion? Are we going to do it with setbacks? Are we going to do it with parcel size? Joel always has creative input from a legal standpoint. Haven't heard from community development on this, though. What do you think, Heidi?
I'm still soaking it all in.
Fair enough.
So just to, you know, just to add to that discussion, I think we're all okay with there being, well, we're talking about it being okay to have 5,000 square foot grow on a half-acre parcel in manufacturing zone. So that's why I'm just, and I throw around the idea of a 5-acre ag parcel, and that, you know, with appropriate setbacks, what thousands of square footage is okay on that parcel? You know, because if we're okay with 500, why aren't we okay with 600? When all these appropriate setbacks are being met, we're talking about the same setback on a 20-acre parcel as a 5-acre parcel would have, and it obviously could, in a building, in an enclosed structure, it's obviously, you know, not going to have any impact necessarily as far as that goes. You are talking about possibly a little more traffic, and like you say, as opposed to other ag practices that may or may not be happening on those properties, it's probably even less, even at the 5,000 square foot size. But. Well,
what about like like what Blake was saying, the incomplete or underutilization of ag land, incomplete use of ag land? So that's an important factor, I suppose. And the larger you go on a piece of ag land in a building, working inside a building with cannabis, the less incentive you have to farm the land in other ways, I suppose. So from that logic, you should say you can't be on a large piece of parcel. You got to keep it on a small parcel, you know, which is backwards logic, but to protect the use. So what are some creative ways to protect or to incentivize more complete uses of ag land as you
So we want to fill this land up. So like a 20-acre piece, 5,000 square feet is about 5% of the land there, right?
No, less.
I mean, do we want a development plan? We could have a development plan, you know, or are you gonna
I don't think you can require any of that.
Outdoor grow permits.
This is a grow park right here. That's what that's become, you know. You want to do it on 20 acres, you gotta develop the whole 20 acres.
Yeah, ultimately, part of what we're talking about too is the fact that there are a lot of underutilized ag properties in this county, whether it be in coastal or out of coastal zone, and you know, I can't speak to any of those properties, but that could allow the actual use of them, period, because a lot of them are just straight up not being used, and they're completely going fallow and brown grass and nothing like that. And so anything small that we do just by saying, like, you have to keep the property, let's say mowed or irrigated or something like that.
Can you do that?
I don't know, but something very small can be better than nothing.
Yeah.
Come to the microphone, sir.
Public comment, please.
Well, I think he had said, what would you like to see done for the
All right, got it? Okay. What would you like to see done with that grass? Is mowing acceptable for the environment? Would you rather see them have livestock on it? It's better for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
or water?
Mowing is better than leaving it up here oxidizing in the wind, but it's kind of silly and stupid at the same time, because it's you know, what I would like to see is grazing of some sort, any species, anything. Grazing is a really conducive to, I guess our environment, our climate concerns, and of course then you've got productivity and something you can sell, and it converts to cash. And I think that ultimate model is more sustainable than saying, yeah, we're going to mow it once a year or twice a year,
Right.
and then just waste fuel, energy, and effort to accomplish what? Well, we've laid the crop on the ground, and now the biology can work on it. So yeah, we've done something for the environment on one hand, but on the other hand, we sent a tractor out.
So, and just
Burned a bunch of diesel.
that is, that, in a perfect world, that would be exactly what you would want to do, right? But I fail to see how that could be ever possible to put into a law, right? Because
you
how
can't
could
make
you
people
require
graze.
find somebody to come graze it, right? Because there's these properties, a
not
lot of these
legal.
properties, no one's grazing them right now because it's just not viable and not happening.
Yeah, because it needs a fence, and then needs a water trough,
Yeah.
and other things. And
Joel would say it's
And so, and then nobody wants to truck their animals over there and put them on this little small 5-acre parcel because it's a lot of work for that person. And it's a non-economically viable option in most scenarios. Not all scenarios, but most scenarios.
So great question. Thanks for the question. I think that the reason I brought it up is as I read this ordinance from Joel, the draft that we're going to see hopefully soon. That's what's in the back of my mind. That's what I'm looking for is, are we setting up a system that is, on one hand stupid because we have ignored the large backyard, and I don't want to participate in that. I want to, cluster this in a fashion that it's somewhat efficient for the grower side of the picture, and then somewhat more efficient for the land. And then there's a balance there that needs to be considered. And of course, ultimately, it's a landowner that owns their land, and they can do what they want with it. So we're not going to regulate them into something necessarily. That's not, I wouldn't advocate for that, but I'd certainly want to set it up to where it's incentivized and encouraged, and not just set up so that the aggressive growers are out there buying 20 and 50-acre parcels so that they can utilize a couple acres in the corner. And then that's what happened down in Humboldt County.
So 5,000 square feet is almost at the level where it becomes profitable to do that. An operation that size, it's really maximized with the right amount of capital investment. It is a lot of money. It's a lot of cash flow, and it's enough that it could incentivize that kind of thing. And that's why I've kind of been leaning toward a little smaller. Maybe it's just in ag land that it goes smaller. Maybe it stops at 2,500 square feet in our ag land in order to preserve the character of our traditional ag lands, if that's what we're trying to shoot for also, if that's a happy medium.
And that 2,500 square foot would be on a 20-acre, or would you allow it on 5/5s? So
I don't know.
I would think that way kind of maintains, the status quo of having a lot of ag lands that aren't utilized very much, And this is something maybe we need to have Joel here for, but using this ordinance to incentivize, an outcome that we all want to happen, I'm not sure what the legalities of that are. I know in San Francisco with the retail part of it, it was important for them, what do they call it, social justice, people who were affected by the drug war were actually prioritized for licensing the first year. And so they called it equity, equity incubator program. And so you're an incubator if you were not ever affected you've never been arrested for drugs. You could come in as an incubator, but you're going to have to provide space for somebody who has been affected by the drug war to start a small business within your wings, pretty much. Other than that, only people for this year that are allowed to apply for retailer licenses are people who basically have a criminal record, and that's what they value. They said, we see the drug war as something that's hurt the community. We'd like the people most hurt to be able to rise up above it. But if we're seeing that we'd like to see ag lands, more strongly utilized, is that something we can do where you have to make a partnership with somebody who's got a traditional agricultural project they'd like to see happen? If you've got a 20-acre piece and maybe you've got 10,000 acres you're going to do in a greenhouse or a structure of some sort, you've got to have a plan to utilize that land within.
Yeah, and it's a great concept, but I think there's a whole lot of barriers to executing that because, you know, I participate in ag, and I can't speak for everybody that participates in ag, but I can tell you that most people who do operate on federally funded loans. And when you start interacting with a business like that on your property, it's a no-go right from the start. And so forcing two, you know, groups like that to come together, they're going to be few and far between, you know, because if you're trying to interact and use this property maybe that the ag person owns, but that person's on it, that right there doesn't work. Because if I own that property having a federally funded loan, I can't even have you operating and renting to you or doing anything, you know, on that piece of property. So there's definitely some barriers to working those two groups together, for sure.
But would the cannabis farmer, would the traditional farmer be impaired from renting from a cannabis farmer?
Okay, so say I had a federally funded loan and I wanted to, and I was paying you, the cannabis farmer, and I was going on there and using it, and knowing that I was I mean, it's a gray area for sure. It's a gray area that some farmers may or may not want to take because it may threaten the viability of all of their other businesses for just a small portion. But yeah, if the cannabis farmer owned it, then maybe that would be a little bit different.
Have we thought about, I mean, again, if Joel were here, it would be a question for Joel. Is it possible for us to require a type of certification for a cannabis farm? You know, there's multiple certification programs for cannabis businesses. One here is actually located in Del Norte County. They were the first licensing cannabis organic licensing agency in the country, Clean Green certified. They're located right here in Del Norte County. There's PEM, which is Dragonfly Earth Medicine. They're a group and family farm in Eugene. They also operate a farm in Canada. They basically feed all of their plants plant-based nutrients that are grown on site. So they grow they grow horsetail, they grow...
Vegan cannabis.
Huh?
Vegan cannabis.
Vegan cannabis. And I'll tell you what, some of those practices actually produce some of the most highest quality terpene values that have been found. And so maybe there's a way we can incentivize or require, you know, certification in those aspects, which brings sustainability and biodiversity to a farm versus just being a monocultured cannabis farm with bare land going dry.
We talked about third-party certification for environmental protections. It's not the same thing, but similar idea.
But you know, in order to continue to be annually renewed on your certification, you've got to follow these specific guidelines. Dragonfly Earth Medicine is one that's got a whole packet out there. They've got 15 different options that you can choose from. It basically works it through different, you know, varying degrees of how you want to sustain your farm, but it incentivizes them to build a healthy environment for their plants, which in general is going to keep pests and different, you know, things at bay.
That's a good idea, and maybe that in my opinion, when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking that maybe pertains more so to the outdoor licensed tier that we may start talking about interacting with.
But couldn't we require an indoor license to partake in sustainability processes that are surrounding the building? Say if it's on ag land.
Maybe if it was on ag land, but it's basically impossible to do that on manufacturing zoned land because the land that isn't available. It's most of the time it's going to be concrete, right? So
we're not concerned.
So one of the things that might help towards is if we're okay with 5,000 square foot on manufacturing zones, maybe we scale it back and say, okay, if you're going to participate in ag zones, you're only going to be allowed a maximum of 2,500 square foot or something like that, which would push some of the bigger people looking towards the manufacturing zones, but some of the smaller tier people that are just trying to just start something maybe on these other properties would go towards the ag zone properties. Maybe we would look away from driving people towards 20-acre ag parcels if you wanted to get bigger than 500 square foot. And then something like you're saying maybe would be more appropriate obviously for ag zones, but even for the outdoor conversations in ag zones.
Sounds like a good happy medium, the 2,500 foot.
I guess I would just weigh in. Yes, we've been organic for 20 years or better, and there's a lot of third-party certifications that can be had from environmental things like biodynamic or organic, animal welfare, human welfare, which is a certification that, you know, we're treating our employees correctly and things like that. We've been through a lot of those, food safety, compliance rules, and those stack, you know, whether they're state or federal. And then depending on who you sell to, your ultimate goal, whether you're selling to Amazon or Whole Foods or whoever, Costco, then different other certifications come into play. Eric, I guess in response to your original question, like, would that be a good thing? I think a yes is the answer. Thinking back to my first meeting or two with this group, and that's what I was thinking is, how do we establish Delaware County grown product to be special and unique and ultimately command a higher price in the marketplace. That's what all these certifications are about. So let's not confuse ourselves. It's not about, you know, GMO free because I believe in GMOs. It's because GMO free sells in the marketplace. So that's ultimately what the entrepreneur or the business owner is commonly thinking. And so these certifications should lead to something, and what that would lead to is a you know, grown in Delaware County means something to the entire community, whether you're in favor or not in favor, and it means that you're environmentally sensitive and you're this and you're that and you're, you know, all those welfare type programs could be included in that. And yeah, that could come from a third-party certifier that's based right here in Crescent City would be ideal. I just spent, our business just had 2 days of Chinese inspections, yesterday and the day before. And, you know, this is something we've been through in the past, but we're going through it in a different format this time. But it's 3 inspectors from China looking into everything, you know, where the milk is grown, where the cattle are fed, where the milk is processed, and things like that. And so, you know, that country, I was in Asia last week, you know, that country, China, requires that. I was also in a couple other Asian countries, and they don't require that. And so my point is, buyers of your product, you know, don't care yet, and they're not going to care until you give them a reason to care. And so it's all on how this thing gets packaged and marketed and sold. And if the entire community is behind it, and we all support, you know, grown in Del Norte, whatever that looks like or feels like in the future, then that can add value, absolutely. And it starts to solve these little equation efficiency problems with small scale, right? So the analogy I would use there is in the dairy industry, when we decided years ago, when I've got all these little kids in the car and I'm thinking of all my friends that moved away to Kansas to milk cows in these large-scale dairy industry. And I've chosen to live here in Delaware County, where we're buffered by the ocean, and you know, the markets and the feedstuffs can only come from one direction. And it makes you think differently, and that's ultimately what led us into going organic and chasing niche markets, because we wanted to get some efficiency right here in our local community. And ultimately stay here, right? So that's what that certification third-party thing is about. It's trying to ultimately add value to the product.
Absolutely. And it does, as the consumer becomes more educated as to what those certifications mean to the farm, to the product that they're consuming, it does increase the value of the overall product. So yeah.
And I see the just the trend in the market reducing a threat to ag land. It's, you know, the profit margins are reducing every day as the business normalizes and functions like a normal business with normal profit margins. And I think in the future, you know, a 5,000 square foot grow probably wouldn't threaten the rest of the ag land. And in order to pay your property taxes and, you know, make it and all of that, you're going to have to utilize the rest of your land. It's not going to pay anymore probably to neglect your resources as time goes forward. But I think now maybe somewhere in the middle, it sounds like maybe we're considering going halfway in the middle for ag land and stopping at 2,500 feet And to what Kurt was saying, that might incentivize the bigger producers to move to the manufacturing areas where the community may find that to be more appropriate, at least in the beginning, and definitely would not be displacing ag lands.
It makes sense from that standpoint when we're considering a manufacturing building is 5,000 square foot with like no setbacks. It doesn't, I mean, I completely see that. So yeah, I mean, I would be in agreement with that. I can see 2,500 square foot being appropriate at this juncture on ag land.
Okay, and that would be for 20-acre parcels. And then what about smaller than that? If we're talking about 5s or 10s, are we stopping at 500? Or are we adamant on that? Or is there a section where we want to get into somewhere in between that?
Well, again, just from my perspective of that, I'm not really an advocate of trying to limit the parcel to 20 and going to that size, because again, that funnels the people into 20-acre ag parcels, which then proliferates
okay, more
of
5s
the unused.
What's the biggest that you think could fit on 5? I mean, well,
2,500.
that's a backwards question, but I mean, now.
I think the same that fits in it everywhere could fit on the 5 with the appropriate setbacks. That's where I was coming from with that. Like,
from our starting point, though, do we want to be more conservative of that in our starting point? Or?
Good, but again,
does it matter? Are we splitting hairs?
Doesn't matter to me.
Just say 2,500 foot on ag lands, period, and don't talk
with a minimum size. That's where we got.
Minimum
we
of 5.
With the
5s, right?
Yeah, well, we were talking 20s and 5s, and then because lots of ag parcels are 5s, and there's indistinguishable from 20s and a lot of scenarios.
Maybe get into setbacks then. If you want to go beyond 500, then we have bigger setbacks.
Even if you're on a 5.
That makes sense, though.
Did we have a setback on 20-acre ag parcels? I can't remember if we had a different setback than the 5-acre ag parcel.
We did.
Did we?
I thought it was the same setback.
I thought so too, but
I don't think so.
I just have the same setback. It didn't change.
All right. Ag and structure, 1,000 foot from residential for a 20-acre property, and 200 foot from an adjoining ag zone property. So that's what we did for 20 acres. That's from my notes anyways. From the last
I do have 20 foot from other property lines of other ownership.
200 feet.
This was for the, I was thinking that was for outdoor conversation though. That was for the outdoor conversation.
Yeah, we got pretty heavily into the outdoor conversation on using that because that's where we went towards in the last meeting or two. Okay. And the indoor, I thought we were focusing more on what are the, because we're trying to use existing structures, right, that may exist.
Right, that was the point, is that if you try to jack in the setbacks way up, then there's going to be a lot less chance of finding existing.
There's no way you're going to find existing structures because most structures on ag lands are oftentimes put into corners of lots and sometimes. Yeah. And so if you're talking about indoor where it's completely mitigated the problems with the smell and whatnot, then that's where we were getting into the 50 foot from property lines. And then we did put in a setback from residential zone. And then that's where we talked about the sizing on using a bigger lots for the bigger facility. But in the end, the building that you may be choosing is really going to be very minimally different.
What about big setbacks to residential zones, and that's it? So that would eliminate a lot of the smaller parcels. Like if you have a 5-acre parcel and it's surrounded by 40-acre ag parcels, who cares, right? But if you have a 5-acre parcel that's close to a residential zone, then you've got an issue because you can't generate the buffer zone. So if you have a big setback, it would just already eliminate most of the small parcels that are in reality not suitable.
Because again, we're not talking about, that's correct. We're not talking about outdoor where there's other mitigating factors. We're talking about indoor, put a setback in, and then, like we said, we can maybe cap it at a smaller number than a manufacturing zone, and that will prevent people from funneling into the large ag parcels and maybe taking them out of use. So
we should talk about different setbacks for residential with this. Then we didn't really get into that much because we started talking so much about the outdoor right away. We dropped the indoor pretty quick. So is 1,000 foot setback from a residential zone unrealistic? Does that wipe out too many parcels? Is that not even necessary in an outdoor or in an indoor rather?
I thought Joel drafted up 50 and 200.
Yeah, that was for 500 foot, but now we're talking about going more than that. So those seem to put
that was also for 5,000 foot when you how it was rolling into 20-acre ag parcels.
So let's start with 50 from property lines and 200 from residential for a 500 foot grow. And then if we're talking about going up from there, then maybe larger setbacks from residential zones, not from neighboring ag properties, but just sensitivity to
Residences or residential zones?
Any residential zones. That way, if somebody comes in and wants to build a house on a place that's already zoned.
I was just doing some math. So a 5-acre parcel that's perfectly square, which would be, you know, equidistant from each side, if you had a 200-foot setback.
It's like 450 feet square.
It's 466.7 feet on each side. So to the center of that would allow you 66 feet.
Well, but that being if there was a residentially zoned piece of property on all sides of it, let's say. So a 5-acre ag
No,
zone.
you said a 200-foot setback to each property line.
Oh, right. Right.
So you got a 60.
You got a 60 foot by 60 foot area to grow.
Square dead in the middle of the acre.
Sure.
I don't think that
You luckily have a building
If you could
in
go
there.
like 185, you might be able to fit at 25.
Well, did I miss something? Because I never heard us say that we were talking about from a property line. That was just from residentially zoned properties.
Well, residential zone property line, that's what he's talking about. So if you had a 5-acre parcel that was completely surrounded by residential zones.
Then it would basically be a no-go.
Okay, so you're not talking like if you had a 5-acre and a 5-acre and a 5-acre in an ag zone.
No,
It'd be
You're talking
50
about
feet.
setbacks
just from a residentially zoned piece of
Residential
property.
zone only.
Oh.
Yeah, kind of the last one standing in a
That way
development area.
that.
A good example to use is Church Tree.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
so when an ag zone buffers up against a residential neighborhood that's residentially zoned, then you would have these setbacks, and, so, yeah, your piece of property could be X'd out because it's too close, but you get places where there's, 20 5-acre ags all next to each other, then
what was the recommended
It would be
setback
this-
from ag to ag?
50.
50-foot regular stock.
Because it's an
Because it's
existing setback.
indoor, we're trying to accompany with
Yeah.
existing structures.
Okay, so now let's talk about more setback for a larger operation. Does that make sense? Like just to be respectful of residential areas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that's the most important thing we're dealing with is being
Yeah.
respectful to residents.
So if we got 200 feet to start with, maybe for each one, you got to add another 50 feet or 100 feet for every 5, for each license stack. Or make it more simple than that. I don't know. Joel would probably have some comments on that, how to set that up. What do you think, Heidi?
I would roll, and when you talk about that, I would roll you back to the question of, is a 500 square, what is the significant difference between let's say a 500 square foot grow and a 1,000 square foot grow? When we're talking about
Just
indoor,
traffic,
when we're talking about indoor,
commercial and.
so
traffic.
1 car a day, 2 cars a day more.
Right.
So what's the difference, right? Like, is 2 cars a day I get it when you're talking about outdoor, when you're talking about smell.
Yeah, I
you're
get
talking
it.
about
Let's
all
just
that
make
stuff,
it
yeah.
principally permitted everywhere, and like, that's where I'd go.
No, well, I'm just trying to understand, like, what are the effects that we're trying to mitigate by putting these larger things in? And so
Just to get it away from
the one
residential
argument
areas.
is that there's 2 more cars a day. So
Right.
how many
Yeah,
feet
if
do we need?
if one of those is really loud, then it matters.
Yeah.
And when the Church Tree group came in and voiced their concerns, that's what I heard,
Sure.
it matters.
So, yeah, I mean, if it's 1 more car, maybe you should be 50 feet away, So that's what I'm saying, if you incrementalize it a little bit.
And one of the things about and we keep going back to the Church Tree Group people that came in here and complained about it, that was a 5-acre ag parcel, right? And so with a 200-foot setback on a line on a 5-acre, it basically wipes that piece of property out. And they were all sitting here saying, from what I gathered, that if it was just on the other side of their property, we would kind of be okay with it.
And that was outdoor and not even
And then, so
indoor.
our regulations are basically eliminating that piece of property. So we've, in my opinion, have taken these regulations and gone a step further than that group of people was asking.
Sure.
Because they came in here with the idea that, well, it's ag, I guess we can't stop it, but if at least it was on the other side of their property.
I can say though, in personal conversations with them, that they didn't want it there at all.
That may be, but the public conversation here, it leaned towards just, if it was just moved away, and so our regulation now is eliminating that property.
Sure.
And so we can keep going and eliminate more properties next to it by making the larger and larger and larger setbacks.
I'm not sure if it's necessary to increase the setbacks. I mean, okay, so if we consider the fact we got a 5-acre property and somebody wants to pull a 500 square foot license, but they want to pull 2, so they're going to have 1,000 square feet. Well, if they've got a 5-acre property and they have to be 200 feet from a residential property line, they might be able to fit one 500 square foot grow in there, but will they be able to fit two? That's going to kind of be up to the operational plan that they're going to present and their geometry. How do they set up their garden? Can they fit 2 stacked licenses in what we're giving them as a parameter?
Well, at what
space?
point should the setback increase? Maybe that's
I don't
a
think
better
it should.
question.
I think I'm in agreement
At
with Kurt in
5,000
the reality
or
of
10,000.
if you've got a 5,000 square foot or a 5-acre ag land and you've got surrounding 3 of your property lines are residentials and one's an ag zone, you could stack up to 2,500 feet and potentially maybe fit within your setbacks from the residential zones. It's highly unlikely, but I think that might be its own limiting factor.
But then you've got an operation that's 5 times larger, surrounded by 3 residential properties, which is kind of what we're trying to steer away from a little bit. So that's why I think there could be a point at which more setback is required. Maybe
We also have sorry for interrupting,
Go ahead.
but I mean, it is a use permit process.
Right,
So,
It's the
I mean,
ultimate mechanism of control.
and there's always going to be the way to
sure.
address that.
Right, so that was what Joel was reminding us to not get too
Wrapped up
stuck in the weeds with
semantics.
individual details and let the
Exactly.
board decide or the planning commission on an individual basis.
So
Good work.
we've got 10 minutes left here. It's 11:50. What would we like to accomplish today?
I think we should try to nail down setbacks for a 5-acre ag, because it seems like that's kind of where we've been sticking ourselves with this 5-acre ag property. Let's try to nail that down, because I think really it is a matter of math. And the math will dictate the size on a 5-acre property. As long as our setbacks from the property lines are efficient and sufficient enough for residential zones or residential properties to not feel the nuisance of that grow, you know, I mean, I think the math will
Well, I just want to make sure we don't drive it to the bigger ag parcels, right, because of the setbacks and all that stuff. And so, you know, we're at 200 foot with a 500 square foot grow. So clearly we're okay with 200 foot at a 501 square foot grow. You know, if I had to just throw something out there and see if anybody agreed with me and trying to come to a happy medium, I would say, okay, so are we okay with, like, let's say 1,500 foot at a 200 foot setback, and do we need to go to 300 or 400 foot to achieve the 2,500 square foot?
I think that's the right track,
You know,
something like
where
that.
are we at there? Personally, I'm at let's stay with 200 and leave it that way, because that allows more opportunities and funnels people less towards the larger parcels. But, you know, what's the medium? And so
Right.
somewhere in there's a medium. Right?
200 foot is, yeah, I mean, that's already going to be hard to find a suitable 5-acre parcel. So to Eric's point, it would naturally limit the numbers, although you could end up with a few situations where they're
Yeah, if the property was
200 feet.
laid out in
Sure.
geometry to fit
Sure.
within those
Well,
parameters, you might be.
There are plenty of 5-acre ag parcels that achieve 200 foot from a residentially zoned piece of property, because most ag parcels are adjoined by other ag parcels, which is not what we're putting a buffer against. We're putting a buffer on property lines to try to scope into existing buildings at 50 foot that may already be
Well,
constructed.
that would be simpler, and then like Heidi just pointed out, you know, the planning commission or the board can always say, this isn't gonna fly, you need 1,000 feet. or
Right, to use the
whatever.
example of Church Tree with
Right.
Heidi's, you know, statement, you know, if the Church Tree people were completely unhappy with it, with this 5-acre property, say these guys were able to find on their 5-acre spot the setback spots and they built their greenhouse, well, the Church Tree group would still have an opportunity to come during the use permit process
Right.
and explain what their concerns are and try to mitigate
And
those.
see the plan and all
And
of
see the
that.
plan, and,
Sure.
you know, I mean, who knows how contentious that could get in a planning commission meeting, but that's for them to decide at that point, you know?
All right.
And again, we're not talking about the grow that was happening on that facility, because that was an outdoor grow. We're talking about an indoor grow.
Yeah, but it's
And-
just a good example for
Yeah.
visual aspects. of
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
200 foot setback. From residential zone.
I'm trying to decide if I'm more confused or less confused. Actually,
you can't figure out if you
yeah, I kind of coming full circle, and I think that, I think we're on the right track here. I'm kind of leaning towards, you know, a 200 foot and not increasing it as the clustering of, stacking licenses grows. It doesn't matter. And part of what I'm thinking is, that dead brown grass, now we're just transferring it to the front yard on one hand, right? And so, either it's going to work or it isn't. And I also agree that, most of these little 5-acre parcels, ag parcels, are clustered next to each other, not always in a residential situation. So, yeah, we will see how that all plays out. But
well, I think the brown grass thing and the trying to be certified with certain land uses, I think that's something that can be added in later, as it becomes more of a norm and you get things rolling, and the county can retroactively come back and say, okay, now we're going to make a new ordinance that says all of our certain grows need to be certified under some spectrum of this, and then helps keep the properties up to snuff.
Yeah, we could come up with our own county, best farming practices for cannabis as we move forward in the future and in the years to come as we're developing, what works in our county, because we have microclimates that are specific to our area that we have opportunities to get into that.
We could have our own CCNRs.
None of these are going to be principally permitted permits. They're constantly going to have to be renewed, and as things change and you add to them, then to renew their permit this year, they're going to have to morph into having this certification, which keeps their property looking a certain way, and that we can get into that once we get moving.
So we're going to get into an anti-brown grass campaign?
Yes.
I mean, it could help. You could do something.
Brown cows, not brown grass.
Yeah, I'd like to chair that committee also.
Couldn't it also, if people come forward to the planning commission to apply for, these licenses, if they present a plan of, okay, I've got this Ag 5 parcel and I'm going to set up this area to start growing and selling at the farmer's market. We have an orchard over here, we're going to do some pumpkins over here. I mean, if they presented that plan as part of the process, I think that could tip things in their favor a little bit too.
Selling.
Absolutely, it should.
I mean, a properly laid out farm is going to have trap crop areas. It's going to have, all different types of sustainable capabilities. I mean, and that's going to be, that's where I'm going to go. I mean, that's where I want to be. So I would hope that most people who are wanting to get into cannabis are going to go that direction too.
And Heidi, I don't know if you can answer this for Joel, but in an ordinance like this, can you have sort of findings like that for the planning commission to, they're not like hard rules, but they're like encouragements, like suggestions. Joel's talked about this in other examples where they sort of have like guidelines that they want to prefer, to what Eric was saying about, or what Ag Commissioner was talking about regarding if your plan includes other, operations, can you have the Planning Commission sort of intentionally factor that in?
I can't think of an example where we currently do that, but I think it is something that we could consider.
Okay.
And maybe there's a tax incentive for businesses to, be sustainable or biodiverse within the cannabis industry. I mean, that's something probably the county could, I mean, obviously it's for, future meetings to discuss, but I mean, I think that's definitely things we need to have as incentives so that we don't have farmers pumping nitrates into these plants, but they're using, properly vetted practices and, I mean, getting away from, chemical fertilizers and hydroponic growing.
Maybe
I mean, even indoor growers can, do aquaponics and, get into different, ways of producing fertilizer for their plants. It's just the incentive. Is the incentive been there for them to do it? No. But, now that we've got a new industry, I think that we could push those boundaries a little bit farther for people and mandate certain things as a county. I don't know how we do it, but.
Cool. Yeah, questions for Joel. How to make people do things.
How to make people do things.
That's not our mission. Okay, we're down to the last minute. Any final comments? We're good next week?
No, we're not good next week. They are full on Wednesday. They do have an availability on the following day, Thursday, from 10 to noon, if that works for everybody's schedule. If not, we'd have to peck around to find another time.
I can do Thursday. Staff Thursday.
Yeah.
What date is that?
That come out the 6th, yeah.
I'm available.
I don't have my calendar. Really don't know.
Let's say yes. Okay.
When you don't know, just say yes.
Either that or it would be the following week, and we would want to try to meet then anyhow, so.
Okay. So yes, it would be October 4th, 10 to noon.
October 4th. We don't really have much other choice anyway, unless we just want to skip it all together, which we probably shouldn't do, even if Blake can't make it. We probably still want to meet and have Joel here to answer questions about how to make people
He
do
may
things.
even have that
So,
ready for us.
so our next meeting probably needs to focus into the outdoor conversation, but also getting we get the ordinance from Joel to like look through, and maybe we'll have some additions to it. So I think maybe the day might focus on, are we going to have that by then, you know? 'Cause
For our agenda, we've just kept it open. We had it focused, a few times before, but we've just kept it broad as commercial cultivation so that we could talk about whatever.
well, today was kind of like a rollback to try to
Right.
refinalize what we had talked about before,
Right.
because we kept going with trying to make an outdoor ordinance at the same time. But
So in
like,
terms
you
of
know,
the
let's cut that off
agenda,
and
we
do
could
the
keep it
indoor.
the same, which is just discussion of commercial cultivation, or we could, if we wanted to hone it in for whatever reason, but I don't think we really need to. I think we can just call it just commercial cultivation, and we can finish up the indoor recommendations, and then, we don't have a member of the Yurok tribe. I missed an email from Kathleen. She wasn't sure if we were going to have a quorum and didn't want to send somebody out, and I didn't see it until this morning, so hopefully we'll have them next time, and which is relevant for the
for their ag
cultivation
plans.
discussion. Yeah, so I think
know
we
they
just
did
keep
wanna
it
be a
open,
part of
just
that.
keep it broad, commercial cultivation discussion, if that's all right. Keeps it simple.
Okay, I think we're set. Any
On the 4th, Thursday the 4th.
Thursday the 4th next week?
Thursday the 4th.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming, and meeting's adjourned.